All right, we're gonna start this one off, and we got two veterans in the house when it comes to curtain wall, but I think this is gonna be a lot of fun and very insightful for everybody. So before I dig into it, very nice to have both of you on. Kurt, we're newer to getting to know each other, but Pete, we known each other a long time. So thank you both for coming on, and maybe you could share how you two came across one another.
Oh, Pete, go ahead, take the lead.
Sure. Yeah, so pretty exciting. Been in the industry a long time, Adrian, as you know. A lot of history with TSI, obviously. Once I got started a rep firm, got my own rep firm going. Now, Kurt and I met. So I joined Peerless to become a rep. I think I started January of 22. Peerless was in the middle of obviously started as a punch window company. Kind of grew into window wall and whatnot as that market expanded. But something I actually used to talk to Kobe about back 2014 or 15 was unitized curtain wall. It was by far my favorite product in the industry. TSI had done a lot of it. I just thought it was great for everybody. Install, we all the stuff that we'll get into today, Adrian. But Peerless needed a product that did that. And the first meeting that I went to, Peerless was looking at three different options. They were looking at Talon Wall with Kurt. They were looking at developing their own, I think maybe with CDC at the time. And then the third option was a company from Europe that had one that Peerless would extrude and kind of take the details and whatnot. Truthfully, that curtain wall system was a little bit over designed. It was a double chamber, double chicken head system that you don't see a lot in the United States. Or maybe Benson, I think, has one, but it looked like it might be a little bit more expensive. And whatnot. Fortunately for us, they settled on an agreement with Kurt, and we're able to make Talon Wall work. I think personally, Talon Wall. I've told Kurt this. I've told you this. Anybody listen? I think it's the best unitized curtain wall system in the country. We can talk about that as we go through it, but or in the world. But as a result, we started to push Talon Wall about that summer. I think that's when Kurt and I met. I flew to Chicago. It was a couple prospective customers. We went on some job sites. We sat with Kurt. We got the whole history as to what had happened and what was going on. And actually, it was spectacular. So,
So I'm actually So let's back up a second here because both of you, I think, are brushing over, and you didn't start Kurt yet, but you guys are brushing over a huge history. Kurt, that you have as a glazing contractor in Chicago, and then Pete, that you have as a glazing contract running a major glazing contracting firm in DC. So two major markets, sort of call it market leaders in each respective market. So before we get into what you guys are developing now, you guys have really, well, maybe not since the beginning, Pete, but probably from your really early days, you've been installing unitized systems, both of you, right?
Yeah, in our contracting company in Chicago, we went to Unitize right around the 99, 2000 mark because, we did our work, all our installation with ornamental iron workers, full union, a great union, but known as a higher cost all-in package. And we were looking for ways that we could control quality, obviously accelerate the speed of building enclosure because I haven't been anywhere else with it, but Chicago is pretty insane with the production that they attain and they expect. So, we had to get into unitization just basically to be competitive and to keep the quality up and to get those buildings turned over.
So before the 2020s, call it like it, even you, Pete, in your like really strong stint of unitized from 2010 to 2020, were you predominantly working with domestically sourced systems?
I think the only product that I can think of that we brought in from outside the country was Erie, which is Canada, which is just over the Detroit border, basically. Really? Certainly North American at very least. No, I think everything that we did was in North America. I mean, Benson, we partnered with them, I think 3 or 4 different times on different projects. The tower building was our first unitized project. My father, Vic, I got to throw a shout out to him, was did a great job in this industry and whatnot. But that's what got him hooked on unitized. So that was 1990. I think it was 1997 or 98. That's the one that's out on the way to Rockville. It's a silver building with white. It was the old Bank of America. That's the shape of a football. Benson did a spectacular job on it, and that's kind of what got us hooked on it. And then I think like a lot of markets, Adrian, the unitized curtain wall, because of the speed, the less number of people and whatnot, when DC was really growing and having a hard time getting construction workers, everything flipped from stick to assembled and glazed, at least window wall. And then, certainly every office building at that time, there was a ton of them. They all went unitized curtain wall.
So you've worked with the W&Ws, the Parmas Benson, Enclosed Fabrica, all the premier unitizers, who really had that strong stretch at that time.
Sure.
What was the turning point in your eyes where people started looking at sourcing overseas? And this can't be a New York driven move. This is something we've been seeing all over the country. So have you seen an uptick in the past 5 years? And do you remember an inflection point?
I can let Kurt kind of get into that one a little bit more from a Chicago perspective. Truthfully, I don't think we ever saw it in the DC market. Office buildings slowed dramatically or virtually stopped in about 2015, 16. Harmon was a major player there, Pioneer, Benson, TSI. We had a lot of us that were in that market at the time. It didn't continue to grow like it had before. DC is also a 12-story building, so it doesn't really bring in the big guys. Although you get out to Virginia, or you can get to some places in Maryland, they'll bring a tower in from or build a tower that's taller than that. And you'll see some of it. I think but I think the market changed a little bit for glass. Adrian, is where we saw it. We saw more Chinese glass. We saw a little bit of European glass and whatnot coming in. Entekk had some help. XYG, SYP, and the glass side from China. That's probably more what we saw. But I'd say all the metal was still pretty much everything from the U.S. or certainly from North America.
So that's probably a more important talking point where you're talking, sub 60, 70,000 square feet in some type of ornamental geometry or configuration, a lot of atypical conditions. You're going to attract a highly specialized design oriented firm versus once you go to the rinse and repeat, high production, high volume, you're going to attract a lot of other players. So, Kurt, I've looked at your portfolio over the years in Chicago, and you've done a lot of that 80, 100, 150, 200,000 square foot jobs. So over the years, was a lot of that stuff domestically sourced?
There were the domestic sourcing. There's one contractor in particular that I can remember that I believe it was in the early to, probably in that 2002, 2004 area. Somebody brought over an overseas manufacturer, which was the first one. It was a window wall that was completely factory glazed and shipped out of China. And there was a lot of problems associated with it, but I kind of see that as the moment, the turning point where it never turned back. The foreign influence got huge. Chicago has been unitizing for quite a while for the reasons we talked about. You get the inclement weather. We haven't seen anything over 5 stories done with a stick type application for years. It's either been a unitized window wall or a unitized curtain wall. And we do see, I would say in Chicago, it's gone to very high percentage overseas imports.
I wasn't going to go in this direction, but has it been thermally driven over the years? Like, what is it? I guess you might maybe have higher union labor rates, and a lot of times that might be driving the decision. But from a performance standpoint, were there any limitations or thermal requirements that would hinder highly glazed offerings, or not in the past and not yet?
To me, that has not been a divider. That's not been a red line. And, it's been part and parcel. The unitized products have developed the thermal improvement and efficiency right alongside all the stick. So we've never seen anybody say you have to do this or that to attain thermal efficiency. So
yeah, agreed. You kind of followed the glass. It felt like as the glass kept performing better, the curtain walls kept getting better and staying ahead at that point.
So now that you guys have a lot of experience on the contracting side and now are sort of on the manufacturing production side, what has your experience, the first topic, been with coming in as a unified effort, contractor and manufacturer, and single sourcing versus doing projects where those contracts were split up and you had sort of a forced marriage arrangement with a particular supplier? Maybe I'll start with you, Kurt. Have you? I'm guessing yes, but have you experienced that in the past, and how does that usually unfold?
In Chicago, they've divided contracts, issued separate contracts for many years. When the unitized window wall came in and imported, that was the only way to do it. And there's a few firms that obviously they're going to offer the entire offering, but the the appetite for risk is still such that the contractors, developers, owners would love to have you be, the one throat to choke theory, where they want you to be responsible for everything, and that's a whole other risk profile that I'm sure we're going to get into. But they've also had, and I've participated in a few jobs there, major projects where the manufacturing entity that I developed supplied material to the owner, and they hired an erector. So I know there's different geographies in the country that are a little more attuned to that, a little more comfortable with it. But Chicago's made it work.
So I think as our Arvida side, especially given the volume, it's, it comes to a point where they're just asking for labor only on a small volume job where the margins is basically you're just only taking on risk being the contractor on site without being able to mark up the material. But on a $80 million curtain wall job where you might have a substantial, 7-8 figure installation contract, all of a sudden, does that make it appealing? Pete, did you ever toy with installation only contracts at TSI?
Very little. We did the best we could to avoid them. We didn't have an issue doing it with Benson, obviously, where it was kind of a combined. What we normally did with Benson is we did the labor on their unitized curtain wall, and then we also did all the stick, the doors, some metal panels, and louvers, whatever else was on the in the scope. We did that part ourselves, and that gave us enough material and enough markup on different things to kind of make it work financially. We did a couple at the very end, and we were fortunate that we signed good contracts. They were really tough project to get out of. They weren't very well run by the company that we were doing the labor for, but we were able to protect ourselves. I do think it's a challenge, and Kurt's been able to do it to his credit. Yeah, I think he did have a little bit of a unique balance there where he kind of controlled both companies. I do think if you've got the curtain wall coming from one company and installation coming from another, I think the general contractors are two very difficult contracts to write. And I think to get all that scope and everything it takes a lot of work. And no matter how you do it, curtain wall guy and the glazer or the installer better be on the same page. They better be partners, even if they're not legally partners. They better be partnered up as far as that one goes. And I think that's kind of the key to all of this type of stuff. So in my market in the Southeast, I'm basically Richmond to the South Carolina, Georgia line and Tennessee. Most of what we're doing here, we're selling to glazing contractors. They're marking it up, doing the installation plus all the other scopes. And so far it's working out pretty well. So, and DC was for the most part that way as well.
Well, I think what you just said about being partners going into it, everybody holds hands in the beginning and says this is going to be the greatest project. And then all of a sudden there's material delays, stuff is being shaken out on the floor and touch-up work has to be done. And everybody's documenting, what did this do? What did this do? So getting everybody on board from that standpoint, I would think is very challenging. Why do you think in the curtain wall market, it's common for the manufacturer, curtain wall contractor to hold the contract and sort of subcontract the labor versus window wall and windows is the opposite, where the installation company holds the contract? Where do you think, and maybe a little more, Peter Kern, about the history behind why the industry decided to go into those two directions?
Well, from my viewpoint and from what I've seen, there's what's turning to be a misperception by general contractors that, and again, users, consumers, that curtain wall is much more complicated, much more expensive, much heavier, much larger structurally, and therefore, that has more perceived risk with it. Where my experience is kind of in the opposite, especially with the newer products like the one that Pete was talking about. It's taken all that out of it. So a curtain wall, even a competitor's curtain wall, a typical one that's out there, to me, they're very straightforward and arriving the way they do to the job sites, compartmentalized and packaged and identified and very few loose pieces and parts. To me, it's all about perception. It's old school. You still have people that think that there's three cost structures. One being a window wall, and the second being a stick built curtain wall, and the third being a unitized curtain wall. And to me, that's completely erroneous.
Pete, you and I had spoken before about sort of the old school window wall concept of laying out receptors and having to caulk them, and it's very, very labor intensive, especially in a high labor rate market. That old school mentality around curtain wall being more complicated or more expensive, when you really kind of break everything out by material and engineering and installation, I guess the question is curtain wall more expensive? And then if not, why is there that perception? And how do we overcome that?
I think in terms of real dollars, in other words, forget risk, forget timing, forget the amount of manpower, any of that stuff. I think if you literally just add both products up, I think depending upon the cost of labor in that market, I think you can get to a place where you can justify window wall on an Excel spreadsheet, meaning one comes out at $90 installed, the other one comes out at 93 or 94. They're not very far apart, but you guys know today it's about getting jobs approved, and sometimes $3 or $4 might make a difference. I can't imagine how it could. But Adrian, I think your question's a little deeper, knowing what we know. From my perspective, if I were the owner, I would want the unitized curtain wall product because I don't have to maintain caulk joints on the outside. Everything's factory sealed. It's a proven system. Pretty much any decent quality unitized curtain wall rarely fails water tests, rarely fails mock up every now and again. You can kind of push one to the extreme if you really want to. I've been a part of a couple of those ornate curtain walls, but for the most part, unitized curtain wall, the details are worked out. It just works. It takes a lot less people to do it. Layout is hypercritical, obviously, when you do that, although I would argue it's hypercritical for any product. Thick guys can kind of work around some things a little bit more. But I think once you get layout right, particularly on the same page with the concrete guy, the unitized curtain wall to me is a much better product. And if I'm an owner, for that $2, $3, whatever I think I may save, minus all the reduced risk, I'm taking the reduced risk and the good product. And then I can really, quite honestly, the curtain wall guy and the concrete guy closing the building, and now all I got to worry about is interior. So I do think it's better, but I do think there's a case where the strict financial people can still justify it. I see it down here in the Carolinas because labor's less. So they do have a road there, and there's some history with stick. Although even this market, I think, is starting to move to assembled and glazed as well.
And yeah, I mean it's funny you say that, Kurt, about Chicago unitizing for decades. Carolina's maybe not as much. DC definitely not, but I mean Atlanta, yes. And Pete, I was in Nashville recently, and maybe they're older projects, sure, but you still see 20-story buildings going up with stick glazing and storefront profiles in the punched openings. So you're probably getting more exposure to that now more than ever, right? And seeing these markets transition.
100%. Well, one of the cool things for me, quite honestly, is DC went through the transition really about 2005. After that, you did not see an office building built that wasn't unitized curtain wall. Rarely would you see something, maybe something really small, but DC, they kind of make up for the lack of height with ornate features. And that pretty much always goes to unitized curtain wall. The cool thing for me is I'm kind of reliving 2005 to 2010 here in the Carolinas. One of the companies that I work with a lot is done a lot, and they're a lot easier to work with. A lot of the rest of the market hadn't done as much, but now most of them have done one or two in most cases with me. And it is fun kind of watching it change. And I think on the general contractor side, we're seeing it change as well. I think they go into it skeptically. Why would we pay $4, $5, whatever it is, more for something else? But then when they get to the end of it, they tell you that they're not going back. So it's pretty neat that way, I think.
Yeah, and we've seen in the Chicago climate, because of the extremes we have, we go from the colds to the hots. I was in the business in the 80s and in the 90s, and almost everything at that point was an I-beam stick, and even with molded corner gaskets, these things have all pulled apart. So I can't tell you how many that they've had to hire consultancy to come out, put together a bid package, and that lifespan, that maybe 10 years, maybe 15, maybe 20 years, but it seems like a long time. But all of a sudden, the blink of an eye, you've got a major cost that you have to apply to the exterior facade of your building that doesn't exist in a curtain wall, typically unitized, that's designed around a lot of moving joints, that are made to move and made to flex and made to change with thermal and building movements and dead loads and live loads and all kinds of things that change over time. It's amazing how these structures of these buildings change and sag from design. And those sticks, I don't care what you say, unless you've got a really hybridized stick wall, it doesn't handle that.
All right, all those walls that you were putting in from 95 to 2005, so call it 20, 25, 30-year-old facades at the moment. Aside from premature IGU failure or improper splice joint seals, let's say just adequate installation, what are the points of failure and what was sort of business as usual, everyday practice for you then that you look back now and say, how the hell were we doing that?
And that one's for me. I mean, it was amazing at the lack of knowledge of how silicone performed as a sealant, because I'm back from the PTI 707 days. The gummy crap that used to put the dam plugs in. The Cornellier 1600 wall type product with P, and it said right in the instructions PTI 707. If you ever tried to gum that or gun that poly, you'd wear it, and you're stringy, and people didn't understand. And these were tradesmen that were talented and they were competent and they were trained, but they didn't understand how to prep and how to clean and how to possibly prime and then how to tool the silicone. So you had all of these, quote unquote pressure equalized systems or even water management systems where all that joinery was kind of just, they'd stick a gun in, and regardless of how you trained or how you did quality control, if you went and did a disassembly to try to figure out forensically what was going wrong, you should see. I mean, the silicone is squirted and hanging all over and blopped in. It's not tooled. It's improper joint design. It's in improper configuration. It wasn't prepped. The guys get, people, they're people, right? You're out there, especially if you're working in a cold, you got gloves on. It's very, very difficult to properly apply those joints to make a good pressure equalized chamber that's going to last, or even a good water management chamber, because we've seen a lot of those fail. So, obviously, back to like Pete says, you have to have an ownership team and a consultancy team and a general contractor team who understands that quality is the hallmark. They're in it for the long game. They're not just going to try to flip the building in the next cycle and next ROP, a refi, and they're willing to understand that. And then obviously the speed of enclosure speaks for itself. I mean, we no matter how many personnel we put on a project, we could never get close to the rate of complete enclosure and all work from the floor slabs that we see with the unitized curtain wall products.
Oh, yes, sir. So when it comes to design assist, delegated design, or design build type of approach for a project, who should I don't want to say who should the general contractor, architect, or facade consultant be engaged with, but in that early stage before you're actually contracted, or maybe you're getting a design assist contract, how do they piece together the proper installation team, curtain wall supplier, even if it ends up going to more of a competitive bid style, especially when you have to sort of piece together all these people and parties to be on the same page? How should that process look? Should they be talking to the, I'll shout out A1A or, those types of people that you work with, or should they be talking to you guys? What is the best path to get that adequate design feedback from a production or manufacturing standpoint, but also keeping labor, logistics, and sequencing in mind and getting accurate feedback from that standpoint?
From our viewpoint, or from my viewpoint, after having to sign contracts for many years and seeing the risk transfer device, that has come up called, delegated design or design build, it's an oxymoron on these projects, because at the same time that the design firm or that the general contractor will try to bake that line into the agreement, you'll see some very strict designations of what you can do in the specifications for the product, or for the project and for the facade. And so legally, it opens up a real Pandora's box, because if you are a design builder or you get delegated design, then the proper way to do it is draw general profiles, a general aesthetic approach to a facade for a project, and then give some pretty specific criteria for what you want it to do. And it's everything. That's everything you possibly think of. Even things that people are still learning about, like movement, what happens to a building structure and how it moves. And then if you're going to sign that on a delegated design build basis, you can't dictate it as a general contractor, or as a consultant, or as the architect. Legally and theoretically, at that point, if you're going to be kind of a smart guy and you're going to put all that risk in one bucket, then you have to stand back and let that party, through their means and methods and their products and their approach, attain the outline specification, the criteria, performance criteria for the building. And that's where I think a lot more contractors need to be educated, because they get boxed in to these things, and then they sit in these meetings, because I know I did it early, before you learn the hard way. And you get all this dictated to you, and you see specific glass manufacturers, specific glass makeups, all kinds of things that aren't necessarily required for the performance that they're looking for. So in that point, delegated designer, sorry, you can give me something that has the color that you like, but the rest of it is up to me. And if it's delegated design, I'm going to bring you my manufacturer as well. And the risk that the general contractor and the architect and designer and consultancy team run otherwise is if they designate that, there's some very specific federal laws that once they tell you you have to do that, if something as a contractor goes wrong, they bought it. And that's another thing that I think contractors, that install need to be a little more educated about. Everything is a double-edged sword in our business, and the facade business has got to be the riskiest one, or the biggest actual perceived risk out there. And back to Adrian, your question, how do you involve that? How do you get that involved? If you're going to run the auction, if you're going to, put it out there and you're going to try to buy that last $5 a square foot out of that, then have a good set of specifications, have a good set of criteria for how the building is going to perform. Have some basis of design colors and things that and performance wise you want to attain. And then it's up to, if you're going to write that contract, it's up to the contractor and or the manufacturer both together to take that specification as part of that bid and redline. That's something, I always was brought up in the business, specs are sacred. You can't do, oh my God, it's specified. Well, if you're going to get something like that, that's delegated design, it's incumbent on you as the contractor. And if you need your in-house consultant, or if you need your manufacturer's counsel or whatever it is, sit down and redline that spec very clearly, line by line. And it's a time-consuming process, but again, risk mitigation, and submit that with your bid package. And then insist, if you get hired for that job, if you're going to put delegated design in my contract and make me liable for that in my bond company, my underwriter and the people supporting me, then all the things that I told you up front about that bid need to be boiled into that hard contract. And I think as somebody who's gone to school hard knocks for a long time, you do more of that. You educate more contractors on, hey, we're allowed to do that by the nature of what's being asked of us. The better industry is going to be, because then you will have, like you said, collaboration, and people will say, okay, well, I know what Pete's going to give us on this job because look who he's involved with, and look at this thoughtful review I've seen at bid time that we can consider for a contract. This is for real, as opposed to, well, they checked all the boxes and they submitted a proposal. Let's just write them this contract to lock them up, and that's their problem.
To play devil's advocate, if, all those years you were, not all those years, there's projects where they had imported window wall and you were pricing labor only. So let's say you have bonding issue or capacity where you can't take on the material. If it's sizable enough where your labor can be profitable, all of a sudden now you're providing an installation only contract and you're not liable for that material procurement and making sure it's compliant with specs and it's going to perform. You're just responsible for your labor. Why wouldn't more glazing contractors not be pushing to focus only on labor to limit liability?
You have to be, as an installer, you have to be not only very experienced, to the school of hard knocks and kind of done it all, seen all that things, but you have to be willing to memorialize that and put that into a document that's binding. And then, what typically happens at those contracts, and I've seen it happen a lot of times, is, people will use intimidation, or they'll use future business, or they'll use all kinds of different things to get you to acquiesce on all those things that you knew about, that you were clear about up front. And then really all that does is it comes right out of the installer's profit margin and increases their risk profile. So if you can particularize it, if you can identify it, and then if you can document, and then if you're strong in the negotiation, and you make sure it is up in your formal contract agreement, then anything that doesn't, within reason, conform to that is a viable claim.
So if you are holding the material contract as a glazing contractor, what does your level of involvement during the pre-construction phase look like in terms of monitoring or managing production? I mean, Pete, if you were holding the contract for TSI and buying out for whoever, did all of a sudden you guys have guys in their plant watching production, watching the PMU testing, taking units off the line and deglazing to make sure that material that you got on site was adequate? Because once you got it, if you had problems, even though you can offset it to the supplier, ultimately it's going to impact you.
Yeah. I think yes and no. It kind of depended upon who we were dealing with. There's always a mock-up, for example, GMS in Atlanta and Baker, systems down in Dallas, about the great Bob Baker. Those types of guys, we really weren't too worried about their quality control. We've done multiple jobs with each. I want to say we probably did 8 or 9, 10 maybe with GMS. We probably did 5 or 6 for Baker. There were specific things on the jobs that we would want to see. We would go down with consultants fairly often, Wish Cheney, FGH, DDC, kind of the big ones in DC. We go down and visit with them. The architects were looking for certain things, and they may have to be done. But the beautiful thing I always felt like is at least in the DC market, about 2016, truthfully, everything switched to design assist, which is where I believe the sweet spot is, by the way. I think every risk that Kurt talked about, he delegated design, 100% true. I also think that delegated design is something that the owner and the GC talk about limiting their risk, but then to Kurt's point, they want to pick the parts. No, like they want as much say as they can possibly get in your delegated design, which it's impossible to write that contract and have it actually work out. And not design assist, the challenges there is a very broad range. I personally think design assist came when financing in the industry changed back probably 2012, 13, somewhere in there. At least that's what we saw in the DC market. The financing companies got more involved. There were less of them and whatnot. And to get a developer to get into a job where it could get released, really didn't want to pay the architect enough money to finish the drawings and whatnot, which left you by the time you were ready to go and on a set of drawings that weren't ready. PSI kind of looked at it in a positive sense. We said, hey, that's an opportunity for us. We have good partners ourselves with one of our partner where we're buying the curtain wall from, sat down. We worked through it. Installation is one part of design assist. You actually have to be able to install what you design. So we felt like we brought that to the table. All the different engineering requirements, everything else, that all mattered. And we had a good partner for that. And when we had good feedback or good participation from the consultant and the architect, we felt like those were our best jobs, and that we were able to, and the owner, particularly in a multifamily, but even in office buildings, cares mostly about the money. We're also able to kind of talk our way through that part of design assist as well. And usually if we did a good job, end up with something we could build, something that was on budget and something we could install. So I think those are always the goals going into it. The lawyers that we talked to said, stay away from delegated design. It's an impossible contract to write, but write a good design assist contract. Give yourself enough time, have a good agenda, make sure the deliverables at the end of it are something that everybody's taking into account. And when you do that, he just did that on the Catawba Two Kings Casino. It really came out excellent. In fact, I was in a meeting with the architect, the owner, general contractor about 2 weeks ago, and they loved the process. And this is a group that switched to us late in the game, and we had to go through all kinds of things, and we ultimately made it work. We had a good team, a lot of back and forth, and we ended up in a good spot. But I think that's kind of the key when it comes to design assist, especially. And I think a good design assist, because the risk stays where it is, but the right people are getting influence in the process to make it all work, make it work financially, make it work design wise, make it work structurally. And I think that's the key.
Yeah. They mandate your participation, not you as a design firm. And participating, it's everybody's best interest.
100% of it.
So the material is the material, but as a glazing contractor, when thinking about ultimately how to be competitive, because like you said, a lot of these projects are dollar driven. When thinking about, you have your wants and your needs. And so, you need to have a certain amount of men on site. You need to have your silicone. You need to have everything that your hard costs, more on the soft cost side in terms of, how many factory visits you want to pay for. Do you want to pay for, to what extent you want to pay for site surveying and laser scans? And I've even seen TSI involved with some of this, robotic surveying of the perimeter before you go out and lay out your anchors, just checking slab condition. So does a lot of that come from being burned in the past with certain glazing contractors? Does it become standard practice over time? As a glazing contractor, how do you think about how much we want to spend as an insurance policy versus, cut it out just to be lean?
I'd be happy to jump on that one. It's kind of one of my pet peeves in the business, to be honest with you. But layout control lines are hypercritical. To me, the saddest part is that if you go to the elevator buck in a lot of the projects, you'll see 6 different colors on there, and there's literally 6 different lines, which means everybody's got control at some different level. They may be within an inch of each other, but regardless, you would think that that's something that people could work with or find a way to agree upon, but it doesn't happen. Why the general contractors don't take that part over, I've never been able to get a good explanation, Adrian, and maybe that's a podcast in the future, but if you could ever get one, because it seems to me if they set that, everybody else's lives would be easier, but it just doesn't seem to happen. So to your point, we gave in begrudgingly at TSI. We were laying out everybody's work. We were bitching and moaning. I think we didn't hit layout on a budget. I don't even know if we ever did. Maybe they're hitting them now fondly if we kept kicking the number up to whatever degree we could. But we also learned that when we did the layout, the weatherproofing was where it needed to be, the studs were where it needed to be. And when we relied on everybody to do it themselves, it caused more inefficiency, more standing around, more downtime, and things like that. I also think, doing a good job layout, you can catch problems early before your guys are even at the area to work. And, it gives you a chance to get all that worked out. So it's definitely risk mitigation. And if there's one line item on your estimate, I would say you probably want to either have beefy or stay higher than you think it should be. That would probably be the one. So
Yeah, I'm gonna turn this one over to Kurt. One of my so I did maybe 5 years of inspection work on a lot of high-rise curtain wall projects between Benson and Perma-Solis. So it was predominantly, I must have done 5 or 6 perma jobs, and I'd be dealing with the same superintendents, and we'd be laughing the first day I showed up, and I'd see them there before they were doing the first concrete pours, and we already knew what we were getting into. But when they'd lay out the Hilti embed channels with the rebar, and I'd watch guys kicking them and tripping over them, and they were at a 60-degree angle, and then you'd get your sign off, and then you'd show up after the pour, and they'd be totally out of whack. And on this specific, that's why I started posting about it, because it just triggered all these memories. And I wish I saved all those pictures back in the day, but what has been your experience, to the best of your ability, if you can sort of memorialize this or capture your thoughts on it? Who should be responsible? What's the best way of going about it? And if you can extrapolate, 30 years of experience with it, what are some of the key takeaways?
That's a great point and a great question. What we ended up doing, and a lot of contracting, no matter what you do, is built around, I guess, a self-defense and a methodology so that it's repeatable and documented. That doesn't make everybody too angry, because no matter what, you still have to get along, at the end of the day. And nobody likes to be the bearer of bad news. So what we ended up doing is we had some very capable people, in our unions, and very capable people in our office staff. But it seemed like every time that we would do a pre-installation survey, which you have to do as built, just to make sure these are going to work, and then you give everybody who's involved in the structure a look ahead, give them a little bit of time to correct it, so they don't be the critical path, is hire an outside surveyor. And that is the only way, through tens of high rises in Chicago, that we were able to keep everything reportable, well documented, clear, and kind of indisputable. So it didn't become my tradespeople versus the concrete forming people, or versus the elevator installer versus the interior finish people, or somebody doing metal stud walls. They come out and they report the state-of-the-art equipment, state-of-the-art procedures, needs, and methods. They come and take the survey. They turn it into a beautiful report. And you can have that report in a native, a DWG or DXF format if somebody wants it. But then that report gets submitted to the gatekeeper for the entire project, which is typically a general contractor. And you don't find it. You simply, everything's done graphically. You've got control points. You've got, your X and Y that you've agreed upon in your contract, and you agree upon tolerances, maximum tolerances in 3 dimensions or in 3 directions. And anything that's outside of that is highlighted and given the appropriate party to correct. And then you're not standing on the site waving your fingers and arguing and being given letters that you're delaying the enclosure of the project, blah, blah, blah. It's not subjective, it's subjective. And the cost was literally a wash. It simply was compartmentalizing that work into a third party that was trained and did that work every day, as opposed to just kind of being part of what we've done. And that's, over 45 years. I mean, I've been involved in installations for 45 years, and I can't tell you how many disputes and schedule conflicts based upon us receiving, at the end of the line, right? The facade contractor receives whatever kind of junk has been done or whatever kind of good quality work has been done by the structure contractor. And the great part about it is when you start to have that as part of your offering, and it was a pittance per square foot overall the offering. And when people start to realize there's that oversight, and when I say people, I mean your concrete contractors in your geography, you deal with more than one in whatever city, they start to say, oh, geez, Beat's going to come out with a survey, and their crews know about it, and they have to eat their own cooking, so they generally do a better job. So we've seen amazing results with that, and the general contractors love it because it kind of democratizes the whole thing. It's not anybody yelling on down high. It very much makes it a participatory type thing, and then we're not bad guys as the last person there with a facade that's got to be erected to a Swiss watch tolerance. So that's worked great, and it's on every job, floor by floor. You give me the floor, remove if it's a coast tension concrete building, remove the reshores, and the day after we'll have our surveyor there. They're going to shoot these. You're going to get the good news or the bad news within 2-3 days after that. It's in line. It's built into the critical path. We've started putting it in our schedules, because there's got to be a course correction. Then it becomes somebody else's problems and not Pete's problem, So it's worked extremely well for dozens of buildings. And like I said, been pretty universally well received.
So I usually don't get to be the guy that says back in my day, but back in my day when I was doing inspections, we didn't have tablets. Now I see people walking around and they are taking pictures of every embed, taking pictures of every splice joint, and it's automatically populated. You must have thousands of documented conditions, and they go back and say, this is what it was when we installed. This is what it was when we signed off on it. Has that helped? Has that made a difference? Or does it just allow for ease of, finger pointing later on down the line?
Well, you're keying on embeds. Is that what you're referring to? Embed placement?
Embeds, but I want to go to the next topics around splice joints and operables and all that. But really, the principles apply to every component of the facade.
Yeah, I think that any self-respecting facade contractor, I'm sure people agree with this. You boil the quality control, the floor walks, numerous floor walks, and then whatever method you use to document that and report that handles their own work, pre-punch type work. So that hopefully the only thing that gets to the punch level from a consultancy or somebody outside is very minor, easily correctable, or kind of an anomaly.
Agreed. And to add real quick too, on the layout side, I love Kurt's idea of the separate survey company. I think it helps because it's a third party. It's a little bit less combative. They're expert in what they do, and Kurt or whoever can just raise their hand and say, I can't. They'll put it in. They look at the report and it's not there. The other thing too, and Kurt will agree with this, whenever our layout guys found problems, the burden of proof that it wasn't where it was supposed to be was on the glazing contract. You didn't get to go and say, oh, we found this was off an inch and a half, because the first answer you got was, no, it's not. And then you had to go prove it was, which I always thought that was a little bit odd too. But to Kurt's point, if you do have a third party in there, I do think it helps you.
So, yeah, we'd say something's an inch off, and they'd say, oh, we had them go out and look at it. He says only a quarter inch. Quit crying. So it was.
And layout, for what we talked about with Unitized curtain wall, is so critical. Like I said, just again, that's the one, if you're going to spend any money, that's the place to do it, because that kind of drives everything else that you do.
Comes to the next topic, and this one I'm interested to hear about with field testing, whether it's typical chamber to test your stack joints or isolated hose tests. As a glazing contractor, would you typically hire out that testing agency? Would the GC do it? Would the owner do it? Do you think there's a little bit of a conflict of interest with the glazing contractor hiring out their own testing agency and paying for that test report?
Pete, you want to give yours on that, and I'll give mine?
I'd be happy to, sure. I would say that it feels like about 10 years ago, we had the testing in our contract 90% of the time. It feels like today, kind of my last 4 or 5 years at TSI and the customers that I'm talking to now, I would say probably more like 80% in the owner's side. And I think that skepticism, Adrian, truthfully, is what you're talking. I think somewhere along the line, a job went bad. Somebody said, oh, the glazing guy paid the guy to fudge the tests or only test the parts that he wanted tested or whatever. And then it went, I think again, I look at it a little bit like design assist. I think if there's some good conversation ahead of testing, what should be tested, what people should expect, how we're going to get there, how we're going to get water to that area, all that type of stuff. But I think the more there's communication between the general contractor, owner, if it's his agency, architect, or he also wants to be a part of approving it, and then the glazer in terms of what is actually going on the site at that condition, because there's all kinds of things sometimes. I think that's kind of the key. I do feel like it's probably better. If I were the owner, I think I would want to pay for it myself. I would just want to tell them that we've got 8 tests coming, 10 tests coming, whatever the case may be, and whichever type of test is going to be. But I would think the owner would want, by the same token as a glazing contractor, other than maybe getting some pre-testing done, we never, we paid for it and moved on with past tests. So
Yeah, I agree. Paradigm shift. I think that we're human, right? If you've got a building with complex geometry and you put a general testing requirement in there that I have to perform 4 tests, well, I'm going to try to pick the easy spots for each one. So I think again that that eliminates that conflict. And the only challenge then for the contractor is in the manufacturer, because they want to be participatory too. Is please communicate, identify the area you're going to be, when you're going to be there, so we can have a rep be part of this thing.
Okay, so I have 2 questions on that. One, I don't think I know, there are standards around, or most specs are written around and that maybe this applies more to the window side than curtain wall side, but contractor has to be given adequate notice or heads up prior to the test. Do you find that that's actually enforced?
I find absolutely not. We continue to fight that to this day. And I think they think they're going to run a sneak attack, and otherwise we're going to go and we're going to do something to one part of the wall that we didn't do to the rest of the wall. But fair is fair, right? I mean, it's we do need to have a provision, and that needs to be talked about during design assist and pre-construction. And then the consultants need to be reined in. I've been on many projects where they, what's one I always heard from certain consultants, out of academic curiosity, let's heat that second down. Let's test it 30 pounds instead of 50. Let's test it a half an hour instead of 50 minutes. Like, come on. Academic curiosity is complete BS. It's going to end up
Watch this thing.
and a lot of that is, there's some mean-spirited consultancies out there. Not everybody, they're human, right? They're a party, they're human, and everybody picks their friends, and they pick the boys pick on somebody they want to pick on. And so I've seen instances, in the industry where people get some undue scrutiny that's well beyond the specified protocol. And so you need to be able to participate, review the protocol with your consultant or however your manufacturer, your in-house technical department, and you need to be able to review and comment on it before they start running wild on the entire building. Because the tests, they're very good, and we love field testing, we love lab testing, but they can be very punishing.
Well, on that point, maybe this is more on the window side than curtain wall side, you tell me, but do you believe in the AMA 1/3 field reduction?
That's an interesting one. In truth, I believe in it with the accessible thresholds, with the low profile thresholds for multifamily and terrace doors. I believe in it. It's to get 12 or 15 pound pressure on a terrace door with a low profile threshold, that can chop that 1/4 inch lip. Very, very difficult. Workmanship has to be perfect. And generally, my experience was they'd come out and they'd want to put a 15-pound chamber on the door after the trades and walk in and out of it and scuff it, warp the threshold, the whole shot. Little stones. I'm sure you've seen those, the little pebbles that get wedged that you can't see that show up. There's a lot of things that happen. So yes, I'm sorry about the long answer. I don't necessarily feel like you have to have reductions from 12 to 8 or what have you for good fenestration products, because I think that the reduction is important for water management products, not pressure equalized products. If you had a good factory assembled glazed pressure equalized product for the fixed and operable portions, I don't see that you need a reduction. For the doors, we've had a hard time over the years in real world with very good craftsmen and very good products across the board. Every manufacturer, very difficulty passing with no reduction.
So I wasn't going to go here either, but now you're bringing things up. So doors is a great topic on that. Operable windows, I texted you a picture of Entekk to ask about it, because every operable I ever did, or multifamily curtain wall I ever did, the guys were using crowbars or wood blocking to shove open the operables to get fresh air on the floors, especially in the summer months, to get some natural ventilation. And that's after the curtain wall contractor signed off and put their tape and said, do not touch. And so that goes back to that whole liability aspect. Terrace doors, uh, interface conditions at balconies or parapets, operable windows, hoist run leave outs. These are things I think that were probably a problem in 1998, and they're still going to be a problem in 2028, right?
Mhm. Well, for us, again, school hard knocks. It requires discipline on the part of your partner, your general contractor. But we had a policy, and we had basically a standard operating procedure for operable elements. They were tuned, obviously, in the factory, and then they were shipped out with tamper tape. And they were clearly marked because, again, it's like the no trespassing sign. You have to clearly mark it, otherwise it's not enforceable. And it said, don't touch these vents. Don't, you do it, you're going to cost somebody money. And we've had great results with that. Responsible contractors, general contractors that want to have a good end product, don't want to go back on something like that, will support it. I've seen them actually threaten to and actually kick people off of projects that are repeat offenders. We've done 50-story towers with a general contractor I don't want to name that they enforced it, and every piece of tamper tape was intact. And so when you took the tamper tape out and took it for its its maiden voyage, everything was perfect. But that helped a lot because, yeah, removable arms are another big component of that. Of course, they'll put channel locks or vice grips on those to try to defeat that. But it also makes it very easy to see that somebody's abused the hardware. So kind of in the self-defense, but it's good for the whole team type thing. Find a way to document and create quality control, and then it becomes sacred cow. That's a tough one. But I'd say,
Well, yeah. I mean, what I want to what I really want to close with, is that you both are veterans in the industry, but you also are have a lot of energy and are really trying to. You have a youthfulness despite despite the experience. I know you guys are trying to make a change, and Kurt, with your product, deploying it throughout the country, Pete, sort of transforming some of these new markets. That's unique. I try to have 30-year veterans on this podcast, and some either are too salty on the industry or don't want to talk about it, or feel like it's a dead end, don't even bother, I'm moving on to something more important, or I'm going to focus on my wife or my kids or my grandkids, whatever that means. So what have you seen? Is the younger generation interested? Are we making the same mistakes over and over again? Some of the topics I just brought up are issues, 30-year-old issues that are still not being properly addressed. There's a lot of questions here. Do you think we're focusing on the wrong areas? Stuff like having third-party surveyors out checking the floor. Who knows? Maybe in 5 years that'll be standard practice. Maybe it won't. Do you find the younger people are taking interest in trying to progress the industry, or all these lessons you're talking about, not being memorialized or captured properly?
it's a great question. In my view, the younger people, they're very smart. They want to do the right thing, and they also, like every other young person, wants to do anything different than their forebears. They're very receptive to it, but it's all based on the culture of the company you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a bunch of, and they're still out there, larger construction companies with grizzled veterans that don't want to hear about it, don't want to waste their time, they just want to go on, they just want to move on, making everybody else a problem. Yeah, you have a cultural problem there, but other ones, we've found it's been well received. These are new best practices that your next generation can make their own, and the buildings are better for it. There's all kinds of things that we boiled in that we've been really happy about being able to partner with people in Chicago, like having completely clean floors. I mean, what's worse, Pete, than on any kind of facade project than having stubs and risers and piping and studs and wood blocking and rafts of drywall, pallets of drywall on your way. They said it couldn't be done in Chicago because of the speed of enclosure that was happening on these projects. But on our major projects, we've drafted and gotten agreement with younger people and good culture to mandate contrast that the floor is yours. So when you're ready for that floor, you got 3 days. So we're doing 50, 60, 70, 80-story buildings. They were doing 3-day turns, complete enclosure, done, walk away, perfectly safe, happy. All the other trades get to work behind the screen, so that they got a controlled environment, and the quality is amazing. And they don't let the trades come in until they're supposed to come in. In the old days, the 30-year thing was put everybody on the floor. The enclosure is included. your HVAC contractors, your piping contractors, metal stud contractors, electrical contractors, put them all out and let them work it out. And then obviously when everybody starts to run behind, then you just invoke clauses in the contract say you have to work overtime and weekends to make up what you've lost. So it's just self-defeating. So yeah, the young people are the key to having these type of things improve the industry for everybody, not just facade contract.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm actually pretty bullish about the young people, Adrian. I give you credit. You and I have talked quite a bit, but I see quite a few of them. Ricky Urbach at A1's one is you got his young early 30s that is just doing a ton of great things down there, and there are others I'm missing them. I'm sure, but I do think I do think that you have to be realistic too. I think there were, in some ways in the past, there was more knowledge, more people came up through installing it in the field and kind of working their way up through that. I don't think you see quite as much of that anymore. So I think young people have to respect the fact that it's a good idea to talk to your field crews and particularly the good ones. And I think you're going to learn a lot from a very different perspective and where you get most of your information. I also think there's not quite as many safety nets, if you will, out there. In 2006, if I was on a job site and I was behind, if I ran into the superintendent from the general contractor, he was probably an old carpenter, and he probably knew almost as much, especially at my age at that time, as much about my trade as I did and the other trades around it. And he would kind of warn you about, hey, when you get to this part, remember this changes, and that guy's got to get his part right, but you have to have your stuff right and whatnot. And I felt like even I went out and learned something. My father was big on that, be on the job sites. That's where everything happens. Our contractor for the installation of the products. The rest of it is kind of a path to get there, and it's important. But in the end of the day, our contract says we have to install it by a certain date and install it properly and whatnot. And so be where that installation happens. I think learning that, and then I think realizing that you have to take your trade seriously the way that you do. You have to know more today than you did in the past. There's not as many safety nets around. You have to have good information. So maybe an outside surveying company doing that part kind of eliminates that variable. And now you've got good information and you guys can do the next part. Be good at the things you're supposed to be good at, the install, the organizing of the floors, the loading of the floors, the checking embeds, all that type of stuff. But I think that's the key. And like I said, I'm more bullish. Most of the young people that I've come across, I would say, want to do it right, ask the right questions. I don't know that they always know where to get the right information, but I do think that they're trying to take it on and trying to make it better. So, yeah.
20 years, this is the way we've all done it, because that's poison. But what I found is it's kind of cool because business has just a ton of young people in it now, the general contracting and coming up in architecture and consulting. And we're actually to the point now with some of the things that we've opened our eyes to. And when they do the next job with somebody else, if they don't have you on board as a facade contractor, they get kind of spoiled. And they're like, well, where's my floor survey? Where's my professional floor survey? And they're going at it. Got fun. Yeah. It's kind of, and horror stories. Oh my God. I can't believe that, they had these embeds all screwed up because they did this, and this, everything was just a mess. And so that's how best practices are born. Right. So you get the old coots that get singed enough times that they relay it to somebody younger, and somebody younger comes up with a better mousetrap and they they teach everybody else. So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, Kurt and Pete, that was a lot of fun, a lot of lessons to take away. So, thank you both sincerely for coming on.
Thanks for having us, Adrian. Agreed, a lot of fun. Great to see you, Kurt.
Great to see you, Pete. And Adrian, keep it up, man. Love what you put out.
Thank you, guys.
Glad to help.